I really see Kim as sort of our resident philosopher, and so he spends a lot of time thinking about what ILM is and what it can be and how we can build that bridge. So, over to Kim Geheb.
Thanks, Dom. And good afternoon and good morning elsewhere in the world to colleagues and friends. Today I just want to touch on three areas of our work. And firstly, to talk a little bit about how we approach landscapes and how we frame them in our programmatic implementation. The second is thinking about how we actually do the integration. I always find it very interesting, like we talk about how valuable integration actually is, but we seem so inadequately equipped to, in fact, achieve that. And then finally, to provide you with a very brief introduction to the landscapes for our future program, LFF, if you'll allow another acronym, beyond what has already been spoken about. So when we talk about landscapes, we talk about them as systems. And I know that's a little bit of a no-brainer. We all understand that. But in terms of our institutional response to systems, that's a pretty complicated thing. Systems are, of course, a set of interconnected components moving in a particular direction. And so we have the integration already at the landscape scale. And they're also sociological. So we have to understand that that integration isn't merely between biophysical parts, but indeed between the biophysical and the social and economic parts. And then finally, they're complex. And I often find that when we talk to government partners and other corporate partners, complexity represents something that's really quite intimidating. But at the same time, that speaks to our general institutional incapability when it comes to addressing integration. If we weren't so sectorally aligned, we might be much better at addressing complexity more generally. So when we define integrated landscape management, we see it as a process that, just like Cora was talking about, and really the idea here with process is that we implement systems that then can keep pace or keep step with landscape systems. And we come at this from the angle of managing or addressing, or as I prefer to say, engaging with the competing demands on land through adaptation and indeed integrated management systems. What I want to reiterate here once again is that the really significant challenges when it comes to integrated landscape management is around the integration itself and the adaptivity, to have the nimble-footedness required to be able to slip into these systems, keep pace with them, and then send them off into positive directions. So within that ambit, we've developed a framework, and it's got 6 dimensions to it. I think that with a lot of the presentations that have already been happening here in the GLF have already focused on the critical importance of multi-stakeholder fora, or MSFs as we call them. And so 2 of those dimensions that we've identified relate specifically to multi-stakeholder fora. There are multitude benefits to why we would want to do that, not least the climate justice and social justice that Dom referenced earlier, but because it also makes a lot of practical sense. We see multi-stakeholder fora as being one of the most promising avenues for developing the kinds of adaptation and flexibility needed to be able to address the Sustainable Development Goals and indeed the climate crisis. One of the key areas also that we think is critical to multi-stakeholder fora revolves around the development, or rather I should say the co-creation of a shared vision. And there are 2 really key reasons for this. The first of which is that the vision then allows us to organize all of these stakeholders behind the vision as they aim to move forwards and to engage with that overall integrated landscape system. But then more particularly, is to enable the kinds of flexibility that we're looking for within the landscape approach as a whole. Of course, it's possible for us to see multi-stakeholder fora as decision-making arenas, especially if they're empowered to make decisions. And that would certainly be something that we would encourage. And therefore, we look forwards to futures where we see that these processes are institutionalized, or rather embedded, if you like, in larger governance systems at multiple scales and across territories in the ways that Cora referenced in her presentation. These decision-making arenas then are supplied with the kinds of knowledge and information that they require in order to make satisfactory decisions. And so that then references the tools and solutions that external interventions are able to provide, and which in particular evidence-based sources are able to supply. But what I do want to emphasize with all of this is that there's a lot of promise in integrated landscape systems, and indeed the multi-stakeholder fora that accompany them. But this relates back to the initial question that was posed at the beginning of this session as to whether or not we have the right kind of institutions to be able to deliver this. And this is a key concern for us, is that despite the fact that rhetorically everybody is capable of agreeing that integration is necessary, we still approach these critical problems and questions from a sectoral perspective. Moving on to talking about the Landscapes for Our Future program, as has already been mentioned, we are 22 projects distributed across the global south. We actually implement in 23 countries. It's a massive program, and it has very, very high diversity. Each one of these projects is run by a different institution. Each one of these projects has a multitude of stakeholders associated with it, and each one of these projects then approaches the question of ILM and the landscapes that they're addressing from different angles, whether that be from conservation angles or from a livelihoods angle and so on. And the projects then reference goals that are some of the most critical challenges that we are facing today, that include climate change, then critical livelihoods difficulties, and then finally the major conservation problems we confront today. Now, I coordinate something called the central component, and the central component is a support facility for each one of these projects. We don't actually coordinate the projects themselves. That's a responsibility that remains together with the EU delegations in the respective countries. But we provide then technical support, whether that be in the form of a very technical foci, such as around soil conditions, forest cover, carbon stores, and so on and so forth. But more particularly, we're interested in the procedural aspects of this and how we can support the projects to implement multi-stakeholder fora in an effective way. And that then, of course, means that we work very hard on knowledge generation, learning from the projects. We have to remember that all of these projects, in one way or another, are fairly cutting edge. They're advancing into arenas where we haven't really been before. And so we expect a certain amount of failure as well as we expect a certain amount of success. But failure is so important for the lessons that it's able to generate, and which we would then want to engage and outreach across each one of the projects so that we get systemic learning between all of the projects involved. What I should also just say is that we're very keen as well to work up and down the hierarchy, feeding into the EU itself and supporting them with their ILM ambitions and strategy, as well as national governments in the countries where the projects are being implemented. So I think that then is my presentation. You're very welcome to approach me or to send us questions and requests for additional information, or to Nicholas Gottman, my counterpart at the EC delegation the EC in Brussels. Thank you very much.